to 106, I was very unsure of what I would learn in this subject. I had minimal knowledge of Aboriginal history and the many issues surrounding the culture today. And throughout school I had limited knowledge of pretty much anything to do with Aboriginals. And due to this I had a very sheltered perspective on Indigenous history and I had not considered any of the deeper issues. There are so many problems which are prevalent around the world today that the Australian government and public often fail to recognise our local and national issues, struggles and problems.
When I first chose to study TPP 106, I had a very small level of knowledge towards the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders culture, but I came in with an expectance to discover a more in-depth understanding towards Indigenous societies, their communities, their culture and their history.
Well, before I came into TPP 106, I really didn't know much about Aboriginal communities or Torres Strait Islander communities. I knew very little. Anyone would ask me about any history or past, present or future, I wouldn't really have a clue, to be honest. But yeah.
I mean, you get taught in school about Captain Cook and how he came and claimed the land, and that's about it.
Yeah,
That's all I knew.
there's a lot to learn about Aboriginal communities.
I was born in New Zealand to an Italian mother and an Australian father. My Italian mother, auntie and ex-husband are all dark-skinned and were often taken as Maori, making me witness to racism. I was often the voice for my family, as it broke my heart to see hurt in my loved ones, be it family or friends. From birth, school, adult, I've always had multicultural friends. I only ever, and still do today, see a fellow human.
Before I joined TPP 106, I knew a reasonable amount, but not really enough about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to call myself well versed. And I suppose even now, I wouldn't consider myself as such, but I think that I have more of an understanding of what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people go through. And as an Aboriginal person from Tasmania who looks white, it was always very difficult for me to understand where I fit into the mould that people just sort of try and put the Indigenous peoples of Australia into. And TPP 106 helped me understand that there really isn't a mould.
To live in a world where the Indigenous culture is celebrated and recognised as one of the oldest and most beautiful cultures this world has ever seen.
What is your knowledge now of Australian Indigenous history after completing 106?
Comparing it before, comparing it now, it's through the roof. I know knowledges of, and by personal research around my own area, about local Indigenous identities of the Moreton Bay region.
I found the discussions in class extremely interesting considering my reasonably sheltered education. when it comes to Aboriginal cultures and societies. Multiple things have sparked my interest, especially since I've acknowledged the fact that I have no previous experience in this area. Something in the conversations that I found surprising was the fact that their history is passed on to the next generation through stories. But due to this method, there is a fear that they no longer portray the original message, which is a concern in many Aboriginal communities as their past is being changed without their consent.
So what did we learn?
Well, we learned about kinship, cultural identity, communication, Aboriginal art forms. There was many topics that we all expressed, but the major one that made me remember in this classroom was when Kelly brought in guests, especially Aboriginal guests. It was really great listening to them and what community means to them.
Even learning that everything has a dreaming behind it, like it's not just one thing.
Well, Terra Nullius, meaning no man's land, was a law that was declared by the Governor of Australia in early times when the settlers came, and it justified an invasion into a settlement. Terra Nullius, for me, like, the worst thing about Terra Nullius is the fact that it took humanity and devalued them to the level of beasts.
So during the course, we've had many interesting discussions in class and read through a plethora of informative articles. And it is really hard to narrow down to just a few topics which really captured my attention. Probably learning about the history of Indigenous Australians was a real eye-opening experience. Especially after watching Utopia, it became clear to me that the little knowledge I had of Australian history was given to me with a bias, focusing only on a white perspective. And as a result of watching this movie, I now feel like I have a broader view and awareness of Indigenous history, as well as the complex issues that they face in society today.
The Northern Territory intervention was based off circumstantial evidence that when an investigation was concluded, it was proven that it was false. That there was no evidence of sexual activity with children or sexual trafficking, and just the mere thought of that in this culture is preposterous. The government, thinking of greed, wanting to exploit and suppress people, mobilised the Australian military against Australian citizens in this country. It was a shameful, greedy act.
Coming to my father's country, Australia, nearly 20 years ago, shocked me to see the lack of empathy, compassion and understanding this country has, ill-informed about Australia's first people this country is.
I feel as though through learning about concepts such as Kanini and Nguruku, really put into perspective the complexity and uniqueness that Aboriginal culture is, as well as the severity of what was taken away from them, the paramount status of these principles and these ideologies.
Knowing about the local word for Kinyani, Mumburi, the same term, oneness, the connection, knowing why I feel, or knowing the how I feel, and knowing in the knowledge I know.
So there are many facets to become culturally competent, and there can be actions like being empathetic and understanding of one's culture and not putting your own culture above other cultures, as well as being aware of what is and is not culturally appropriate.
It was not our land to declare. In fact, Cook's orders, Cook had secret orders to, with consent of the local Indigenous population, declare a portion of the land in His Majesty's name. And why those orders, how those orders got interpreted to be an invasion confounds me as to how it accelerated so rapidly into the genocide and murders that we've seen today. So reconciliation is about being transparent, about recognizing that wrongs were made, and we don't have to hide it. We don't have to feel shame for it anymore. And it is about being sorry. When I say sorry, it's my ancestors that are speaking through me, and on behalf of my ancestors, I am sorry.
Through developing my cultural competency framework in TPP 106, I've realized that we are the contemporary custodians of this land, and as such it is our right, our responsibility to continue the traditions and keep the culture alive that was here, keep the spirit that was here for thousands of years alive, instead of replace it. Instead of making our culture the culture, why not all cultures?
Yeah, where can it take me? Well, I suppose towards my undergraduate Bachelor of Social Science, the understanding of Aboriginal communities or anything in that area will still give me the broader knowledge. So if anyone asks me the question, who were the first peoples, I'll understand and I can give a brief explanation of past history.
Here's to the future and here's to looking forward.